Everyone, today I'll be walking you through the final project required coding activity. This is for Unit 1 called Python Absolute Beginner. Make sure to complete all of the modules before you get to this point or it's going to be really confusing. Again, this is based on modules 1 through 4. So moving forward, we have a program called adding report function. And so I'm going to read through all of the instructions step by step, and then we're also going to take a look at this diagram to get a better sense of what it is that this program is asking us to do. So let's go ahead and get started. It says this program calls on adding report function, which repeatedly takes a positive integer input until the user quits and then sums up the integers and prints out a report. So some key words here, it says it repeatedly takes a positive integer. So it's giving us a clue that we might need to use a while loop until the user quits. So we'll have something that asks for the user to quit, and then it prints a report of some sort. So moving forward, adding report function takes one string parameter. Again, parameter is going to be what goes in between the parentheses, and there are two types of reports. A is used to print all of the input integers and the total, while T is going to be an argument that only prints the total. So here is some valuable information. It says that this is the sample input and output, and we're going to have a statement rather, that asks the user to input an integer, then to add it to the total, or to type in Q to quit. And so this will be an example. You can see that until the user types in something invalid, where they just typed in 9 in all alphabetical characters, it says invalid, or when they type in Q. And so another thing to note here is that even though the user put in a lowercase q, it was able to read it and print out a total, print out the report. So that is using A as an argument, whereas we need to have T as an argument when the user puts in quit. Again, instead of just having just a q or a lowercase q, even if the user puts in quit, spells it out, the program should be able to read that as it being the end of that loop. So how do you understand this diagram here? So first, we notice some things right here from the jump. There is a while true loop. Okay, so it's saying that while true, moving here, input is integer or quit. So it's asking, is the input a digit? If it is, we want to add it to the total. If it's not, we want to check to see if it starts with a Q, and if it does, then we will move on to the report. But if it doesn't, then we want to have a print that says invalid input. These diamonds, again, are going to refer to a decision, and it's giving us a clue that it is going to be an if statement. So it's saying if the input is a digit and it's yes, we're adding it to the total. What kind of a report is it? If it's a report A, then we want to add to item string and then continue on to the loop until we get to a point where the user says no to quit. Or if it's not A, then we run through it again. If it's not A, that means that we're saying that it's going to be a T, so it prints out just the total. Here again, if it's not a digit and it starts with a Q, and if the report is an A, then we wanted to print the items and the total. Where if it's not an A, we want to have something that accounts for the T report, so it just prints out the total and then it breaks. So moving on to the specific instructions, we want to go ahead and get started at the very top where it says initialize total variable, which will sum integers values entered. Okay, initialize items variable, which will build a string of integer inputs separated by a new line character. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add these here just for now. We know that these are two variables, but it hasn't asked us specifically what to do with them. But just to start off, I'm going to add these variables here. So it said, I'm putting 0 in because it said that we will sum all the integer values. If I put it in quotes, it's going to run it as a string, but we need to have an integer. And items is going to be items with a new line, so we use a \n. define the adding report function with one parameter report that will be the string of a default t. So all of this is, this is just asking us to have a define function, which I'm actually going to put at the very top. Define. I'm going to have that underneath our define function. Define adding report. And I'm going to set report equal to a default of t. That way, you know, even if we don't specify, it will run t anyways. Okay? So moving forward, we have inside the function, build a forever loop, infinite while loop, and inside the while loop, complete the following, and then a list of tasks that it needs to do. So let's go ahead and get started with that while loop. We have while true, colon. So what is it asking? It says, use a variable to gather input, integer or q. Okay, this is very simple. We just want to have user input, and we want to set that equal to input, and just a simple sentence that says enter a positive integer or q. Awesome. So next we have check if the input string is a digit, in parentheses integer, and if it is, and then a list of things. So this is going to be a simple if statement. And we're asking to see if the user's input was a digit or not. So this is going to test is digit, colon. So what if it is a digit? What do we want to do? It says if the input string is a digit, then add the input string to total. Okay, so we want to have total plus or equal to user input. So this would be fine, except when you're asking for user input, it will run it as a string, whereas right now we have total equal to 0 being an integer. So what we want to do to make sure that we don't run into any errors is cast the user input to an integer. That way, whatever the user inputs here, once we figure out that it is a digit, then it's going to add it to 0. Now we have completed this if statement, and so we need to move on. It says, we've said that we're going to add it to total. If the report type is A, add the numeric characters to the item string separated by a new line. So we're going to have a nested if statement. And we're going to say if the report equals, and of course we have to have two equal signs. We're saying this is to test if it's true or not. If it's an A, capital A, then what do we want it to do? Add the numeric characters to the item string separated by a new line. Okay, this is very simple. We're just going to have items set equal to items plus the user input plus a new line, and I'm actually going to put that in quotations. And of course everything is able to be added together because we cast it to an integer. So moving on, is that the end of the if statement? Yes. So it's saying if it's not a digit, check if the input string is a q or starts with a q, and then if it is q, then there's a list of tasks. So we're going to have an else if statement, an else statement, and we're going to say if the user input. So right now we want to check to see if the user input is a q, and we want to have it so that if the user spells out quit or they have a lowercase q, that it will still account for it anyways, and that none of that really matters. They don't have to have a specific type of q. So what we're going to do is cast that user, transfer that user input to an uppercase letter, that the first word is an uppercase letter, and that we're going to say that it starts with a queue. That way, even if the user types in quit, or if they put in a lowercase q, it doesn't really matter. It will stop it at that point anyways. So once we're done with that, it says if the user, or excuse me, if the report type is A, print out all the integer types, integer items entered, and the sum total. Okay, so we're going to have another nested if statement. If report equals to A, then we want to have something that prints out the report. So we'll have print, and then we'll create a new line, \n, plus the items that we've been accumulating, plus a new line. Because the reason why I'm adding so many new lines is that I want it to look exactly like that sample output that we had from earlier. So it's going to look something like this. We wanted to have it all spaced out. If I didn't have those new lines, then everything would be all together, and we want it to be very organized. So adding that in, and then we want to add in the total because this is an A report. So we'll do total, and then n, new line, plus, and then we want to add the total. And again, we're running into a little bit of the same issue from earlier where I cast it to an integer. These are all strings, so I want to make sure that the total, where we have it set to a 0 integer, we want to cast it to a string instead. That way everything will be added together seamlessly. Okay, so that ends that portion. And so now, moving forward, it says, we were right here, if the report type is T, then print out just the total only. Okay, so we want to just have an else statement that says, and I don't have to put in else report is equal to T. It's implied here because the default is T. So we'll do, we want to print out just the total. So we'll have a quote, a new line, total, I'm going to say plus the total. And again, we're going to cast this to a string because otherwise we wouldn't be able to add a string in an integer. When you're adding, make sure that all of the types match, otherwise it won't run correctly. Right, and so then it says break out of the while loop and end the function after printing the report A or T. So once it's done printing the report, we want something to tell it to stop running. So we're going to break out of that loop. All right, and we're nearing the end. It says if it's not a digit, so if it's not a digit, if it doesn't apply to any of these here, we need to have an else statement. So we'll start off by saying else. We want to have something, it says if it's not a digit and if it doesn't start with Q, then print a message that says input is invalid. So again, if it doesn't apply to any of these if statements, we want to have a simple print statement that says your input is invalid. Similarly to what they had here when someone typed in 9 instead of putting in a number. Great. So now we are nearing the end. It says to call the adding report function A, then the T report parameters. So right now we have, so if I just did adding report, right now we have the report default set to T, so I'm just going to get the total. So let's run that and test it out. If I put, we'll keep it really simple with 2, 2, 2, and then I'm going to put in quit. Oh, look, we ran into an issue. So it says that string object has no attribute to start with. So we're just going to go right here. That's supposed to say starts with, so we'll run that again. 2, 2, 2, and then we'll just have Q. Perfect. So right there we had just missed the S and starts with, but it just prints out a report of the total. It's not printing out all the items because the only default that we have right now is the T. So let's try to do it as a report of a, okay, and if I try to run it, again, we'll do some positive integers, 1, 3, 2, and again, let's test out that quit function. Let's do, let's try doing just a lowercase quit. Excellent. So our starts with in upper works just fine. We have the A report where it prints out all the items and then a new line and then the total. Great. And so let's test out an invalid input. So we will have, let's do 4, 5, 6. Let's try to type in 7. Great, so it says your input is invalid, and more importantly, the while loop is still going because we haven't told it to stop if it's invalid. We're just asking it to stop when the user wants to quit. So again, quit, and there you go. So that is how you complete the final project required coding activity for Module 5. Let me know if you guys have any questions.